AITA for snapping back at a stranger who accused me of cultural appropriation for wearing my Indian friend Sari during our college cultural dress-up day. Every year, my college hosts an event called Cultural Dress-Up Day. The idea is simple but beautiful. Students are encouraged to wear traditional outfits from their own culture and showcase the diversity on campus. There's a small stage set up in the main hall, almost like a mini fashion show, and people walk around dressed in bright colors, intricate designs, and clothing that carries meaning and history. This year was my second time attending, and I was excited. Last year, I wore a traditional chi pao. Since I'm ethnically Chinese, it felt natural and personal. But this time, my best friend S and I decided to make it more fun. S is Indian, and she suggested we swap outfits. Her and one of my kipayos, me and one of her saris. We thought it would be a playful way to celebrate, not just our own heritage, but each other's too. When she brought out the sari she had picked for me, I was stunned. It was gorgeous, pink silk with silver embroidery and golden jewelry to match. In return, I gave her a red and gold chi pao with delicate hairpins to complete the look. We got ready at her house that morning, laughing as we helped each other adjust unfamiliar clothing. I fumbled with the sari pleats, while she struggled to figure out the fastenings of the chi pao. By the time we finished, we looked incredible. Different, but incredible. As we left her house and started walking to college, people glanced at us on the street. Some smiled, some looked curious, but I didn't mind. That was the whole point of the event, to stand out, to show pride, to share culture. On the way, we stopped at a coffee shop for our usual morning drinks. S went to the bathroom while I waited at the counter. That's when I noticed a group of women walking in. They were probably in their late 20s, maybe students, maybe just locals. They ordered quickly but kept glancing over at me. I could tell they were whispering about me, because every time one of them spoke, their eyes darted in my direction. I brushed it off at first. After all, it's not every day you see someone standing in line for coffee in a bright pink sari with layers of jewelry. If anything, I expected stares. But then, one of them walked over. She looked at me directly and asked, "Are you Indian?" I smiled politely and shook my head. "No, I'm not." She raised her eyebrows. "Then don't you think it's a little inappropriate to be wearing that?" I blinked. "Inappropriate?" She nodded, crossing her arms. "Yeah, that's cultural appropriation. You're not Indian, but you're dressing up in their culture. That's not okay." Her words caught me completely off guard. Appropriation? I'd always understood cultural appropriation to mean mocking a culture, stereotyping it, or turning it into a costume for laughs. That wasn't what I was doing at all. I wasn't mocking Indian culture. I was honoring it, sharing in it, celebrating it, and doing so with my Indian best friend's blessing. But in that moment, standing there with my chai latte order number in hand, I felt a knot forming in my stomach. I hadn't expected to be accused of something like that. And the day, which had started with laughter and excitement, suddenly felt complicated. I didn't respond right away. My mind was racing, and a mix of defensiveness and confusion bubbled up inside me. Who was this stranger to tell me what I could or couldn't wear? Who was she to police how people of color interacted with each other's cultures? And yet, part of me wondered if maybe I'd been naive. All I knew for sure was that this encounter was about to change the entire tone of my day. Standing there in line, wrapped in a sari that wasn't mine, I suddenly felt like I'd been thrown under a spotlight I hadn't asked for. The woman's voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough that her friends all turned to look at us. I could feel their eyes on me, waiting to see what I would say. I tried to keep my expression neutral. "I'm just participating in an event at my college," I said carefully. She frowned, unimpressed. "But you're not Indian. You shouldn't be wearing that. Don't you understand that's cultural appropriation?" The word hit me again like a jab. Appropriation. It carried a heavy weight, as if I was guilty of theft, stealing culture, disrespecting heritage, mocking something sacred. And that stung because I wasn't mocking anything. My best friend had dressed me in this sari herself. She had smiled and said I looked beautiful. This wasn't a joke, or a costume, or some half-hearted attempt to play Indian. It was a collaboration, a celebration. Still, I hesitated. For a split second, I thought about taking the easy road, just explaining that it was cultural dress-up day, that my Indian friend was wearing Chinese attire while I wore hers, that it was mutual appreciation. Maybe that would have calmed her down. But something about the way she stood there, arms folded, tone condescending, made my chest tighten. I thought, who is she to tell me what I can and can't wear? Especially when she wasn't Indian herself. So I asked her a question of my own. "Do you think it's okay," I said slowly, "for a white woman to come up to people of color in public and tell them what they're allowed to wear?" Her eyes widened, like she hadn't expected me to push back. She made a sound, half scoff, half gasp, then rolled her eyes dramatically before walking back to her group. I noticed her friends shifting uncomfortably, a couple of them glancing at me with what looked like embarrassment. None of them followed her lead to confront me again. And just like that, it was over. But inside me, it didn't feel over. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up the drinks when a barista called my name. My heart was still thudding in my chest. The whole exchange had lasted less than a minute. but it left me shaken in a way I hadn't expected. When S came back from the bathroom, she saw the look on my face immediately. "What happened?" she asked, concerned. I told her everything as we walked toward college, handing her the drink I'd picked up. At first, her expression was surprised, then it shifted to amusement. She burst out laughing. "Are you serious? That's hilarious," she said. "She really tried to lecture you while wearing jeans and a t-shirt made in Bangladesh?" Her laughter was infectious, and I managed to laugh too, but the knot in my stomach didn't fully ease. Because while she found it funny, I couldn't stop replaying the moment. The woman's accusation. The way she spoke with such certainty, as if she had the right to decide what was appropriation and what wasn't. Was I wrong to snap back the way I did? Maybe. Maybe I could have handled it with more grace, taken the opportunity to explain, to educate, to diffuse the tension. But in that moment, I felt cornered, and my response had come from a place of defense. And even though the encounter was technically finished, I had this feeling it was going to follow me for the rest of the day, maybe longer. The word appropriation kept echoing in my mind long after she walked away. It wasn't the first time I'd heard the term, but it was the first time it had been thrown directly at me like a charge. I tried to remind myself what the concept actually meant. In my understanding, cultural appropriation was when someone took aspects of a culture that wasn't theirs, usually by people in a position of privilege, and used them in a way that mocked, trivialized, or profited off of that culture. Like wearing a Native American headdress as a Halloween costume, or putting chopsticks in your hair and calling it geisha style. Things that were rooted in ignorance, mockery, or disrespect. But what I was doing wasn't that. At least, not in my eyes. My friend had chosen the sari for me. She had wrapped it around me herself, pinned it carefully, adjusted the pleats with practiced hands. She had smiled and said I looked radiant. She was wearing the cheapao I had lent her with equal pride. To us, this was appreciation, not appropriation. So why did a complete stranger get to decide my intentions for me? The more I thought about it, the angrier I felt. This woman wasn't Indian. She wasn't from the culture she was supposedly protecting. She was a white woman who walked up to a Chinese person in a sari and decided she had the authority to police my clothing. There was something deeply ironic about that. That was why I snapped back. "Do you think it's okay for a white woman to tell people of color what they're allowed to wear?" The words had come out sharper than I intended, but in the moment, I couldn't stop myself. It wasn't just about defending myself. It was about calling out the hypocrisy. Her shocked expression had almost been satisfying. Almost. Because as soon as she walked away, the doubts crept in. Was I too harsh? Should I have just calmly explained the event, told her that I was with my Indian friend, that we had swapped clothes as a way of celebrating each other's cultures? Maybe that would have been the nicer way to handle it. Maybe she would have walked away understanding instead of rolling her eyes. But then again, would she have listened? She hadn't approached me with curiosity. She hadn't asked, "Oh, are you part of this event? Or is there a reason you're wearing that?" She had approached me with accusation already on her lips, ready to deliver judgment. So why was I expected to respond with patience? Why did the burden fall on me to be gentle when she hadn't given me the same courtesy? That's what kept circling in my head. On one hand, I felt justified. On the other, I felt uneasy. Because while S found the whole situation hilarious, I wasn't laughing. I was turning it over and over, wondering if I had crossed a line by calling out her whiteness so directly. But here's the thing. If she had really cared about cultural respect, wouldn't she have approached me differently? Asked questions instead of assuming? Listened instead of lecturing? I may have been defensive, but at least I was defending the truth. I wasn't mocking Indian culture. I wasn't turning it into a costume. I was honoring it, with the blessing of the very person whose culture it belonged to. So in the end, while my response might not have been the most diplomatic, I couldn't shake the feeling that she had it coming. Still, the question lingered. Had I stood my ground, or had I just made the situation worse? When I left the coffee shop with S, I thought I'd be able to laugh the whole thing off. Her reaction certainly made it seem that way. She sipped her drink, smirked, and said, "That's hilarious. She really tried to tell you what you can wear? Some people just live to be offended." Her laughter made me feel lighter, like maybe I hadn't overreacted. Maybe this really was just another silly run-in with someone looking for drama. I wanted to believe that. But later that day, when I retold the story to another group of friends, the mood shifted. One of them frowned and said, I get why you were upset, but did you really have to say it like that? You could have just explained the event, you know? It might have been a teaching moment." Another friend nodded. "Yeah, calling her out for being white. I don't know. It sounded a little hostile. Maybe she didn't know better. You could have just told her it was cultural dress-up day and that you and S swapped outfits." Their words stung more than I expected, because they weren't wrong. I could have explained. I could have been calmer, but I hadn't. I had reacted, snapped, gone straight for the sharpest response that came to mind. And while it felt justified in the moment, hearing my friends describe it as hostile made me wonder if I'd lost control. I tried to defend myself, but she didn't come up to me with curiosity. She didn't even ask nicely. She just accused me. Straight out accused me of appropriating. One friend shrugged. True, but you still had the power to set the tone. You could have chosen to de-escalate instead of escalate. The conversation ended there, but the doubts lingered. For the rest of the day, I replayed the scene over and over in my head, like a movie on loop. The woman's raised eyebrows, my sharp reply, her shocked look, my friend's comments about hostility. And suddenly, the encounter that had once seemed funny now felt heavier. I started to wonder if maybe there was truth in both sides. Maybe the stranger had been out of line. Maybe she had overstepped, especially since she wasn't Indian herself. But maybe I had overstepped too. Maybe my comeback, while satisfying, had burned a bridge that could have been turned into understanding. When I confided these thoughts to S later, she just shook her head. Look, she came at you first. Don't beat yourself up for not smiling politely while she lectured you. You don't owe strangers explanations, especially ones who already decided you're in the wrong. Her words were comforting, but the conversation with my other friends still echoed. It was like I had two voices in my head now. One telling me I'd stood my ground, the other telling me I had missed an opportunity to handle it better. Which one was right? I couldn't decide. What I did know was that the situation wasn't as simple as I wanted it to be. It wasn't just about a Sari or about one stranger in a coffee shop. It was about how people perceive culture, ownership, and boundaries, and about how quickly things can escalate when those perceptions collide. And now, I had to face the uncomfortable truth. Even if I hadn't intended to be hostile, that might have been exactly how I came across. That night, I lay in bed still replaying the scene at the coffee shop. The woman's tone, my response, my friend's criticism, S's laughter. It all kept swirling together until I couldn't tell what I actually believed anymore. I thought back to what cultural appropriation meant to me. It was the image of celebrities wearing sacred garments for fashion shoots, or frat boys dressing up in Mexican costumes for Cinco de Mayo parties, or people using chopsticks as hairpins and calling it exotic. Appropriation, to me, was mockery or exploitation. It was stripping culture of its meaning, turning into a trend or a joke. But what I had done didn't feel like that. I hadn't bought a sari from a cheap costume shop. I hadn't worn it to a Halloween party. I had worn it because my Indian best friend had draped it around me with pride, smiling as she told me how beautiful it looked. She was in my cheepow at the same time, celebrating my culture as I celebrated hers. It was mutual appreciation, grounded in friendship and respect. So why did it still sting when someone called it appropriation? I realized it was because, deep down, I cared about being respectful. I didn't want to be that person, the one who takes without understanding. I wanted to celebrate, not exploit. And maybe the stranger at the coffee shop didn't see the difference. Maybe from the outside, it really did just look like I was wearing someone else's culture for fun. And that's where the gray area lies, isn't it? Sometimes, intention and perception don't line up. I could have the best intentions, but someone else might see only disrespect. But the part one couldn't get past was this. Why was it her job to decide? She wasn't Indian. She wasn't from the culture she was defending. She had taken upon herself to lecture me, an Asian person, about how I should or shouldn't engage with another Asian culture. The irony of it still made me shake my head. At the same time, I couldn't dismiss my other friend's point either. Maybe my response, bringing up her whiteness so bluntly, had been more combative than necessary. Maybe she walked away not reflecting on her own assumptions, but just thinking I was rude. Would a calmer explanation have changed anything? If I had smiled and said, actually, it's for a cultural event, and my Indian friend and I swapped clothes to celebrate each other's traditions, would she have softened? Or would she have rolled her eyes anyway, convinced she was right? I'll never know. What I do know is that the moment forced me to look at my own boundaries. Do I owe every stranger an explanation for what I wear? Do I have to justify myself to people who come at me with judgment instead of curiosity? Or am I allowed to defend myself bluntly when someone crosses a line? The truth is, both things can be true. Maybe I could have been gentler, but maybe she also needed to hear that her approach was problematic. Maybe it's not always my job to educate, especially when I'm the one being accused. In the end, the sari wasn't just fabric that day. It became a mirror, forcing me to see the complicated layers of culture, respect, friendship, and judgment. And I wasn't sure if I liked everything it reflected back. By the end of the day, I had gone in circles so many times that I wasn't sure what to think anymore. Part of me stood firm. I wasn't appropriating, I was appreciating. S herself, the person whose culture I was supposedly stealing, had been nothing but supportive and amused. That should have been enough. But another part of me couldn't shake the criticism from my other friends. Maybe I'd been sharp. Maybe I could have diffused the whole thing with a calm explanation instead of a pointed retort. Maybe I had chosen pride over patience. Still, I keep coming back to this. She hadn't approached me with kindness. She hadn't asked questions or tried to understand. She had marched up to me, a complete stranger, and delivered a verdict. And in that moment, I felt cornered. I reacted the way anyone might when accused unfairly, by pushing back. So here I am, still wondering, did I do the right thing by calling out the hypocrisy of a white woman policing how people of color engage with each other's cultures? Or was I unnecessarily hostile when I could have chosen to explain and educate? That's why I'm asking AITA for snapping back at a stranger who accused me of cultural appropriation, instead of calmly explaining the event and my intentions.